It's time to remove the void infestation that's plaguing the Rookery. Let's not waste any time and dive right in. 1 minute boss guides for the Rookery, let's go. Kyrioss is going to start the fight with a big burst of damage from Crashing Thunder. This will target all 5 players with fairly large circles. Spread out and use a sizable defensive. Shortly after this, players will be targeted by Wild Lightning. Just make sure you are avoiding these swirls. Once the boss hits 100 energy, the Stormrook will fly to the center of the room and begin casting Lightning Torrent. This will spawn 4 beams that will move either clockwise or counterclockwise. Avoid getting hit by these beams. During this phase, players will also need to avoid the grounding bolts. I recommend that melee try to stack and move in the same direction. It's also worth noting that during this phase, the boss's hitbox is massive, so feel free to step back a little bit if you need to. Once this channel ends, the boss will cast Lightning Dash at a random player, avoid getting hit, and make sure you spread out again. Stormguard Gorren has just 3 mechanics, but it's a fair bit to juggle. First, Crush Reality will have the boss targeting a random range player and leaping to their location, leaving a pool in its wake and sending out a handful of beams. Just make sure you're avoiding these. A good range player will bait these properly along the edge of the room. The main mechanic of this fight is Gorren's Chaotic Corruption ability. This will debuff a player with 4 stacks. This will deal high shadow damage over time, but when it expires, it jumps to the nearest player. Each time this debuff jumps, it does lose a stack, so the idea is that you want to pass it to 4 different players. The reason for this is that once you've been debuffed, it leaves you vulnerable for 10 seconds, making that player take 300% more damage from a second application. Now, the only time you should ever pass it to the same player who has already had it is the tank. Using a defensive, they can generally handle 2 stacks. Last but not least, the boss will cast Dark Gravity, attempting to pull players towards him. Just make sure you're running away from this. As long as you juggle the debuff properly, this fight is pretty simple. Players will want to start the fight by making sure they know which section of the room they're going to be covering. This is going to be important shortly. Tanks, the common strategy on PTR was to stick to one side of the platform away from your group. This keeps the Oblivion wave from accidentally sniping one of your group members. While this does deal magic damage, it's fairly easy for most tanks to manage this without a healer babysitting them. The rest of your group will be handling the other mechanics of the fight. The boss will then cast Unleash Corruption, debuffing 2 players. This deals damage over time, and when dispelled, it leaves a pool on the ground, so you're going to want to avoid standing in melee. The main mechanic of this fight is the Null Upheaval. This will have the monstrosity knocking all players back and spawning not only swirls, but 3 large shards. This is why it was important to know which area of the room you were going to be covering before the fight began. Players will then want to stand next to these shards, breaking them with the circle that's around them. If they aren't broken, an adder will spawn that will most likely lead to a group wipe if not dispatched quickly. The boss is unique in that players must break a set percentage of health absorb shield that's on the boss, and once it's broken, the boss will not only be stunned for 20 seconds, but also take 100% more damage. This is when DPS players should really try to burn the boss for as much as they possibly can. Once the 20 seconds are up, he continues with his current spell queue that he left off with. Keep the shards under control and dispels in check, and this boss will fall in no time. And that's it. Congratulations on beating the Rookery. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that subscribe button. I do make Mythic Plus content for World of Warcraft. It's free, and you can always change your mind later. Of course, thank you to all my Patreon supporters who got early access to these videos and whose support allows me to make content like this. Best of luck in your keys, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace.